This was not your average first time custom loop project. This thing probably took a couple years off of my life. Orthrus is my 2 heads, 1 body gaming/streaming PC. Built inside the Fantex Enthoo 719 case, there are 2 motherboards, a full ATX up top for the streaming rig, and a mini ITX on the bottom for the gaming rig. The top is running a Ryzen 7 3800X with a 2080 Super. The bottom is running an Intel i9 9900K with a 2080 Ti. I built it a couple months ago when I wanted to take my 2 PC streaming rig, which by the way, love, and put it in a more convenient single chassis. The problem was with all this power in a single body, I had some pretty serious heat issues, especially on this insanely OP ITX rig. The i9 was running at a constant 89 degrees, while the 2080 Ti was doing the same thing at like 94 degrees. The decision was made, if I wanted to get the most out of this system, it would need to be liquid cooled. And having absolutely zero previous liquid cooling experience, I'd say it actually turned out pretty great, especially considering how insanely difficult some of these bends ended up being. Let's jump into it. By the way, this video is sponsored by me. Well, actually StreamBeats, to be more specific. StreamBeats is a copyright-free music playlist for you guys to use behind your live streams or your YouTube videos without any risk of copyright strike or demonetization. And I'm able to make that promise because I own the music entirely myself. Right now there are 180 tracks on the playlist with about 6 hours of music, with more releases coming in the next couple weeks. Links to StreamBeats playlist on Spotify, Apple Music, whatever, down in the description below, or if you can't find it, feel free to just search Harris Heller on whatever your streaming platform is, because it's literally on every single one. And if you guys end up having questions about StreamBeats or about the liquid-cooled PC Orthrus, feel free to jump into my Twitch chat. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. Link to that in the description below. For me, liquid cooling is where PC building changes from being equipment into a work of art. Is that fair? Do you guys feel the same way? I've built a large handful of PCs in my time, and I have never had an experience like this one. In the original Orthrus build, I had both GPUs being cooled by their original Founders Edition coolers, and both CPUs were being liquid cooled by NZXT Kraken AIOs. More specifically, the top one had a Kraken Z with that super fancy little LCD screen so I could showcase the Alpha Gaming logo right front and center. And in version 2 of the build, I wanted everything liquid cooled. However, I wanted to maintain that screen on the top CPU. So in this custom loop, I ended up incorporating both GPUs and the bottom CPU. And then I left the Kraken AIO on the top CPU. That way it could kind of keep that screen being like the centerpiece of my machine, which is a pretty commonly asked about feature on my stream since my PC sits behind me. I ended up having a conversation with EKWB about this build, and they sent me almost all the parts and equipment I needed to make this build. And I have to say, man, EK's stuff is just gorgeous. It's just so clean. My original build had a 2070 up top, and I was going to liquid cool that. However, EK didn't have a water block specifically for the Founders Edition 2070. So no, I had to go out and buy another GPU, and the only one that was available was a 2080 Super. Sorry, honey, it's a business purchase. That's how those conversations with my wife usually go, by the way. It is what it is. But beyond this point, everything was incredibly stressful since, one, I'd never done a liquid cooling custom loop before, and two, I didn't have anyone with me who had done it. So even if I did something wrong in the beginning, like installing these water blocks on the GPUs, I never would have known until I filled the whole thing up with water and the temps were out of control or something. Pulling apart a Founders Edition 2080 Ti hurt my heart. I know those coolers are super inefficient, but I just think they're so beautiful. Also, fun fact, when you're done installing the water blocks on the GPUs, there are a bajillion screws left over. And if any of you have ever built something from IKEA, you know that's terrifying. Once all 3 blocks were in place, the next step was to figure out the pathway that the liquid was going to travel. And this turned out to be much more difficult than I expected it to be, just because there was so much stuff crammed into such a tiny space, especially in that tiny ITX rig and the gaming system on the bottom with the GPU block right in front of the motherboard and CPU. However, I did know that I wanted the coolest liquid to go onto the gaming system first, since it was going to be handling a much more powerful load. And of the gaming rig, I wanted to go into the 2080 Ti first. The problem was getting the tubing through that narrow space into the inlet of the GPU, out of the outlet, most likely over the original tubing into the CPU, then somehow get that tubing back out through the same narrow cavern. And then on top of that, somewhere in here, I had to fit a release valve to drain it from the bottom of the system all the way down here. I probably spent a good couple hours adjusting fittings, drawing up schematics, just trying to figure out how to get this to work. Luckily, I decided to do some research on EKWB's site about switching the direction of the inlet and the outlet in a GPU water block. And it turns out on a 2080 Ti, it only makes a difference of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's what I ended up doing. I went out of the pump into a splitter to go to the release valve, then into the outlet of the 2080 Ti water block, out of the inlet of that water block with a super tight curve into the CPU water block. That one took me a couple tries, by the way. Then out of that CPU water block, up behind the other GPU water block, and into the inlet of that one. I ended up doing this all without any measuring, just eyeballing everything. And I learned that that is possible. And actually it's a totally fine way to do it as long as you have a lot of patience and you have a lot of extra tubing. I ended up having to buy an extra 4 meters of PETG tubing just to finish the project, which by the way, not a big deal. Tubing is not expensive. It was like 20 bucks for the whole thing. This bend up to the streaming GPU ended up getting a little closer to the memory sticks than I would have liked, just for aesthetic reasons. However, it matched the bend of the intake tube really well, so I ended up leaving it. The rest of the loop was pretty straightforward. I went out of the GPU outlet, up into the 480 millimeter radiator, super thick. I think it's a 60 millimeter radiator. Out of the radiator, back into the pump. There were only a couple bends that I ended up having to redo and scrap a couple whole tubes just because of some minor discrepancies in the bends that made tubes that were supposed to be like this, like that. And after all the time I put into this, I just wasn't gonna leave that alone. This whole PC has been a black build with white highlights, so I ended up going with white coolant on this. And just so you know, filling a custom loop when it's done, especially with vertically mounted GPUs, probably one of the most beautiful things you can witness. I leak tested the thing for 3 to 4 hours. Everything looked good, and the temperatures are amazing. I've been gaming on a 4K 144 hertz monitor on the gaming rig while streaming on the streaming rig for 5 hours straight, and nothing gets above 40 degrees Celsius. Over the next little bit, I'll definitely be overclocking this thing just to see how far I can push it. Right now, playing Apex Legends in 4K, I'm getting about 90 to 110 frames. And I think with a little extra push there, we can get up to that 144. Probably not all the way to 144. That might be a bit of a stretch, but we'll get closer. There were also a couple surprises that I had to change when going to the liquid cooling that I didn't expect. The first one being the top AIO. If you are super attentive to details, then you'll notice in the previous Orthrus build, that top Kraken AIO was actually a 360 mil radiator. Well, in the new version, I had to change it to a 280 mil. The reasoning for that is not only was the radiator a little bit too long, but also the mounts on this case shifts the 120 millimeter fans over a little bit, and it was pushing right up against the radiator. We had no room for the tubes. So by switching to a 280, we got to shift the whole thing back a little bit and shrink it down, and now we could get those tubes into the top of that front radiator. However, this caused another problem, which was the RAM. Those 140 millimeter fans ended up pushing into the RAM's space, and that Corsair Vengeance high profile RAM was bumping up against the fans, and I couldn't screw the top radiator in place. So I ended up swapping them out with some Trident Z G-Skill RAM that I had in a previous project, which happens to have a tiny little notch in the top of it that perfectly fits the fans. I really lucked out. And the last thing I added to this build were cable mods. Given how high-end this machine was, the cable management was just not something I was proud of. So I went and ordered some white cable mods with some black accents to kind of match the whole aesthetic vibe. I did make one mistake on the 2080 Super. I ordered a 6+8 pin. Turns out I needed an 8+6 pin. So those two ended up having to be twisted around, which is really ugly right now. I've got a replacement on the way, but it's not here in time for this video. I do plan on making a video in the upcoming weeks on all the things that I learned from building my first custom loop. So if you like that video, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the like button because you're a cool dude or dudette. Just person. Also, if there's something that you wanted to know that you think I missed in this video, feel free to jump into my chat. Let's talk about it. I spend a lot of time in just chatting, answering your questions. Link to that in the description down below. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Saturday on Twitch. Or if you'd like to instead talk to a community of people who all do stuff like this, I'm sure a lot of them much better at it than I am. We have a whole PC setup channel where people show off their rigs, their stream setups, and the Discord has about 50,000 members in there right now. So feel free to jump in, find a PC building friend, find some people to answer your questions. Link to the Discord down in the description below. Also, by the way, if you're looking to download the songs from Streambeats for your YouTube videos, the download links are in Discord there. I hope this helped. I hope you enjoyed this process as much as I did. And as always, happy streaming.
One enemy remaining. Trick shots.
Lamau? Good job.
Oh my gosh, you are cracked.
Yeah, baby.
Clutch.